Hey everybody, it's Mrs. Martin, and I am going to take you through the story Catching Cold by Neal Schusterman. Before we get started, I think it's important to point out that we will be annotating today. So if you scroll to the very last page of our packet, you're going to find something called the Annotation Guidelines. You've obviously annotated in the past, and this checklist kind of helps you figure out what would be most important to annotate, because we're not going to mark everything, but we are going to make notes while we read, because that helps us to interact more with the text and understand it better. So you can underline and highlight major points, circle keywords. You can put a question mark next to something that confuses you, or if you have a question while you're reading and it's not something that can be answered immediately, it's a good idea to write it down so that way you remember to talk to me about it at some point later. You can also use an exclamation point for things that surprise you. And if there are connections you can make between this story and another story, you can put a T-T for text to text. If it reminds you of something from your own life, you can put a T-S for text to self. Text to world is if it reminds you of something that you're aware of that's happened in the actual world. And T-M is text to media, meaning it reminds you of a TV show or a movie you've been exposed to. It talks about putting EX for an example, drawing a box around new characters so that way you can always find them very easily, drawing a star or an asterisk next to literary devices you see being used. You can also just write the name of the device. And then you can numerate or write numbers next to arguments, which really is helpful in nonfiction, but isn't really going to work for us today. So that last point that's on page 38, we may not use. Okay, so let's go back up to the story Catching Cold. It is one of the longer stories in the packet, and it's full of some really interesting details. So let's take a look. We've got a picture of an ice cream truck. I don't know about you, that makes me wonder, but let's read on and find out. History tells of a man named Pavlov. Pavlov was a scientist who did a famous experiment with dogs. Each day, he would ring a bell, then feed the dogs, ring a bell, then feed the dogs, over and over, until the dogs knew that the bell meant food. Then one day he just rang the bell. The dogs, who were trained to expect the food after the bell, all began to salivate, drooling all over themselves, expecting food that didn't come. They developed a physiological response to the sound of the bell. It's called classical conditioning. Now, even though this is a fictional story, this section is actually 100% true. There really was a scientist named Pavlov. He really did experiment on dogs, and he got them to drool at the sound of a bell. It is called classical conditioning. So why don't we take a look at this to kind of get an idea of what that's like.
I have to reboot again. Hey, Dwight, do you want an Altoid? What do you think? What? Want an Altoid? Okay. Altoid? Sure. What are you doing? What?
I don't know. My mouth tastes so bad all of a sudden.
Okay, so as we can see on The Office, Jim was able to classically condition Dwight to need an Altoid each time he heard a specific sound. And that's basically what classical conditioning does. It creates an association between two different things that are usually unrelated, just because those two different things have been united together over and over and over again. So that response is reinforced, and which is why we had dogs drooling when there was no food. Okay? The same can often be said of kids when they hear a certain sound wafting over the treetops in their neighborhood. A pleasant sound, a song. The song is different in every neighborhood and in every town across the nation, but the song always means the same thing. Are you listening? Can you hear it now? The music is out there, stealing through your window, echoing between closely packed rows of homes. It seems to come from the left, then the right. It grows louder, then fades, louder, and fades, until you're not sure whether the song is coming or going. And, like Pavlov's dogs, you're drooling. You're scrambling for spare change, begging your parents for $1 because $1 is all it costs to pay the ice cream man. Just $1. And you can have sherbet on a stick in the shape of your favorite cartoon character with a gumball nose. Hurry out that door. The ice cream man is here. So this entire section has really set up the story for us, but it makes a reference to something that's real. And so this is called an illusion. And we talked briefly about illusions when we were doing The Outsiders because Nothing Gold Can Stay was included in the book, and a reference to the Gone with the Wind was included in the book. And that's an illusion. It's when an author takes a reference to an outside thing that actually exists and weaves it into their fictional story. So that's what we're seeing here right now. And you'll see that each section of the story will actually begin with an illusion. And that illusion is there to help us better understand what's going on in the story, right? So in this case, Pavlov's dogs is designed to help us understand how kids react to the ice cream man. Like you, Marty Zybeck was a victim of classical conditioning. However, no one had it worse than Marty. He kept his window open every afternoon when the weather got warm and kept his sizable ears tuned to that high frequency on which the tune would come. So we have a new character here. This is Marty Zybeck. And Marty sounds like he's obsessed with the ice cream man. They tell us no one had it worse than Marty. His particular ice cream truck played Pop Goes the Weasel. It was one of the more annoying ice cream truck tunes, but for Marty, it was a call to arms. Whenever he heard it, Marty was prepared. He already had $1 in his pocket to give to the creamy, cold ice cream man. The moment he heard the song, he would bound down the stairs and burst out the front door. His ears, like radar dishes, would triangulate the direction of the music, and he would take off, his feet pounding heavily, desperately on the pavement. But each day, the result was the exact same. First, he would hear the music in front of him. Then he would hear it passing on another street behind the row of houses to his left. He would run until he was out of breath and practically out of his mind. But the end result was always the same. The music would fade. The creamy cold truck would leave, and he'd be left panting in the street with $1 and no ice cream. So you got to kind of feel bad for Marty here because it sounds like he spends a lot of time trying to catch this ice cream truck and he can't. For some reason, he never seems able to do it. Up here, they describe his ears, that they're like radar dishes. So when we have a comparison that uses like or as, this is a simile. Ultimately, we have a little bit of hyperbole or exaggeration down here where it says that he almost was practically out of his mind. That's what it is. Okay. So, will he really lose his sanity if he doesn't get ice cream? Probably not. But that exaggeration kind of lets us know how he feels about it. If only I were a little faster, he would think, but speed was not one of Marty's strong points. He came in last in everything. He was, in fact, the very definition of last. Not only was his the last name on any school roster, but he was also the last to finish every race, the last to turn in every test, the last to be done with dinner, and the last kid on the school bus. It only seems to follow that no matter how much he tried to get the creamy cold truck, he would be the last kid in the neighborhood out the door. "He's an impatient one, that ice cream man," his mother would say. "Never hangs around long." And then she'd remind Marty that maybe it was best he didn't have the ice cream anyway, as he tended towards being a husky child. Well, it's not a total loss. All that running will do you good. So we're getting a lot of description of Marty here. The fact that the author describes him as the very definition of last tells us that he came in last. He was last on the roster. He was last to finish the race. He was last to turn in his test. He just seems to operate a little slower than the rest of the world around him. And his mother is basically telling us that he's husky. Husky is another word for overweight. So her point is, well, you don't need the ice cream, but at least as you're running, you're probably burning calories. He would sneer at his mother when she said things like that. His mother was as slender as could be, but Marty took after his father, who was not. "I'll bet his ice cream stinks," Marty would grumble. But deep down, he didn't believe it. In his heart of hearts, he believed that creamy cold ice cream was the tastiest, most heavenly frozen treat ever devised by man. And the only way to get it was to buy it from the truck. Marty Zybeck didn't have many goals in life, but at the top of that short list was catching the creamy cold man. So again, we have a little hyperbole, the most heavenly frozen treat ever devised by man. It's what Marty believes, but it tells us that Marty's obsession has him believing stuff that's greatly exaggerated. So when we see this little blue mark, that means we're at the beginning of a new section of the story, which means we can expect an illusion. So this particular illusion is fictional, and it gives us more back information about the story. Let's pay attention. Legend tells of a boy named Jim Jeffries. Jim, as the neighborhood legend goes, was the fastest kid in Little League. He could run faster than any player could throw a ball to a base, so when he got a hit, he rarely got tagged out. He was a winner and did not accept defeat easily. One day, long before anyone can remember, Jim went chasing after the creamy cold ice cream truck, refusing to accept that it was already leaving the neighborhood. He turned the corner waving his dollar bill and was never seen again. Marty Zybeck knew the story of Jim. Children whispered it in hushed tones, but Marty had a logical, practical view of it. Fact, there was no one in the neighborhood with the last name Jeffries. Fact, no one seemed to remember where he lived or what he looked like. Fact, if anyone could confirm the story, it would be Marty's father, who was a well-respected detective with the local police force, and he flatly denied the existence of Jim Jeffries. Marty was convinced it was just a made-up story designed to keep small children from crossing dangerous streets to go get ice cream. Well, he wasn't a small child anymore. He didn't believe in Santa Claus, the Tooth Fairy, or Jim Jeffries. So this illusion is giving us a little background into this fictional world, and it seems like this particular character is the exact opposite of Marty. He's fast. He's so fast that he was not, able to be tagged out in Little League. And so we see that he went after the creamy cold truck and was never seen again. So that seems a little creepy, doesn't it? Keep in mind, this is Neal Schusterman, the author of Full Tilt, so things are gonna get a little creepy, okay? Let's continue. Still, the rumors went round and round every summer when the music came in on the wind and children scraped together their change. This was the summer, however, that Marty discovered a great universal truth that every kid in the neighborhood already knew. Marty would have known it too, had he just been a little more observant. It was as he sat playing video games with his friend Tyler Coyote Moon O'Callahan that the truth began to emerge. The school year had just ended a few days earlier, and the boys were filling their time playing interdimensional kickboxer. 5 minutes into their third game, Marty heard the faint sounds of Pop Goes the Weasel through the open living room window. Although leaving the game would allow Tyler to completely kick him into a parallel dimension and thus win the match, he put down the video controller and stood up. He was mature enough to know that some things, like ice cream, were just more important than video games. So we see a new character right here. This is Marty's friend. Okay. The idea that it's summer, they're playing video games, they're in a house. This leads us to believe our setting is what? What do you think the setting might be? Yeah, we can just say Marty's neighborhood. Neighborhood should be one word, but I've run out of space. And then time frame sounds like modern times. It sounds like it could happen right now, right? Although with this packet, I think you guys have learned to expect a twist. Okay, let's continue. Don't bother, Tyler said calmly. He won't stop for you. He stops for other kids. He'll stop for me. Who says he stops for other kids? That gave Marty pause for thought. Other kids always get ice cream from him. How do you know? Because, Marty said. I always see them running for the ice cream man. Yeah, but did you ever actually see someone eating a creamy cold bar? Marty racked his brain trying to flip through images to find an actual memory of someone walking down the street eating something they bought from the ice cream man, but his memory held no such image. Well, you've eaten creamy cold bars, haven't you? Never, said Tyler. Not once. Sure, I used to run after him like you do, but I never caught him, so I gave up. They looked at each other, the only sound the music coming from somewhere outside, and Tyler said, Everyone hears the music, but have you ever actually seen the truck? This is an interesting point, right? That plus the idea that no one ever gets that truck to stop. No one ever eats creamy cold ice cream bars. Tyler seems to have a more logical, reasonable view of things to this point, right? Of course I have, Marty said. But as he thought about it, he realized that the image of an ice cream truck was only in his head. He had imagined what it would look like if he ever actually got out onto the street in time to catch it, but he never actually saw it. Ooh. You know what I think? Said Tyler. I think it's a ghost truck from the spirit world of our ancestors. Tyler, being half Navajo and half Irish, had a powerful belief in the ancestral spirit world and leprechauns. I think you're nuts, said Marty. Tyler responded by turning to their game and kicking Marty into another dimension. So this goes to show you that Marty, while they don't give us his age, is certainly old enough that his friends are growing up and more reasonable in their view of things. If you can't see the truck and you can't catch the truck, then there's no ice cream truck really, and why are we killing ourselves, right? Tyler's whole, it's a ghost truck from the spirit world of our ancestors. He might believe that. He might believe that it's like a haunted truck that's out there trying to, basically drive people insane. Who knows? But in the end, Marty has had this mistaken belief that he's, got a regular ice cream truck in his neighborhood for a long, long time, which is why he keeps going out there trying to get the ice cream. We have the blue symbol, which means we have another section and another illusion. Fairy tales speak of a Pied Piper. As the story goes, the piper's tune was so entrancing, it lured all the rats from the town of Hamlin. Then, when the townsfolk refused to pay his price, the piper used his tune to lure away all the children into a mountain where, presumably, they either lived happily ever after or died horrible, painful deaths. Fairy tales can go either way. So, you may not know the story of the Pied Piper, but it actually is a fairy tale. I believe it's one of Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tales. So it's about this guy who was paid, or actually was asked by a town to lure away all of the rats because they had a rat problem. But once he did that and the town was rat-free, the townsfolk wouldn't pay him. And so he lured away all of their children. Which I guess is supposed to teach us that when somebody gives you a service, you need to pay them. Otherwise, you suffer consequences. I love the way this is phrased. Fairy tales can go either way, which if you've read enough fairy tales, you know is actually true. Such a thing could never happen to large groups of children in modern times, however, because as everyone knows, large groups of modern children are much too smart for that. Between movies, sitcoms, and the colorful language of older siblings, kids know everything, or at least they think they do. Thinking they do, however, is enough to prevent an entire mob of them from being lured by the music of a Pied Piper. More than likely, they would just laugh at his funny green suit and pointed shoes and then walk the other way. No. When it comes to kids these days, there is safety in numbers, and the only ones who find themselves following the piper are the stragglers. Stragglers like Marty. So while this is telling us that large groups of children in modern times are too smart to be tricked and captured, like the Pied Piper did, stragglers are a little bit different, and Marty is indeed a straggler. So this illusion almost foreshadows, or better, forebodes. So this is an illusion, but it also gives us a sense of foreboding. If you don't remember what that is, it's when an author gives us a clue about what's going to happen in the future of the story, but that clue is something bad, okay? So it seems like the ice cream man is a Pied Piper, and Marty's going to go for it. Marty was not like Tyler. He was not satisfied to treat the creamy cold man as a mystery best left alone. After all, being a detective was in his genes. And so at dinner that night, Marty tried to learn some technique from the greatest detective he knew. Dad, where do you begin an investigation? Usually at the scene of the crime. What if there is no scene? Then why investigate? Because it's important? Is there a paycheck involved? No. Then it's not important. His father was very good at deflecting any and all questions Marty ever asked him with logic that was so circular it often left Marty forgetting what the question was. So it seems like his dad doesn't really answer his questions. You know, he's basically trying to avoid getting into a deeper conversation with his son. I want to investigate the ice cream man, Marty said. Why? Did he run someone over? No, he's just never there. You can't investigate something that isn't there, just something that is. But what about something that was there but isn't anymore? That's called a cold case. It's not my field of expertise. Marty thanked his father and decided he was on his own. He spent that evening pondering the problem, starting with the things he knew for sure. Fact. The music comes from somewhere. Fact. The sound rises and it falls, which suggests that it's moving. Fact. If it's moving throughout their neighborhood, it has to pass by Fillmore Savings Bank around the corner, right? And that's when he came up with the big idea. He approached his father again the following morning. Dad, do you think you could get me some surveillance videos from Fillmore's savings for a school project? No, his father said. What's the project? Surveillance videos means that places like banks, businesses, they have video cameras running all the time and they take footage. So surveillance videos means the actual video footage from the bank. We're doing a mathematical study of how many people use the ATM machine. Can you get those tapes for me? No. Why don't I just get you the bank statistics? We're supposed to write up the statistics ourselves. Can you get me some videos? No, said Mr. Zybeck. I'll ask around. Mr. Zybeck had so many strings he could pull around town, he was often getting tangled up in them. Getting the tapes was fairly easy, certainly easier than having to listen to Marty nag him about him, which is exactly what Marty was counting on. With a determination he rarely showed, Marty settled in to watch the surveillance tapes. Think about what that means. That means that, Marty, who's not particularly motivated to try very hard on anything, sat and watched hours and hours and hours. Like most ATMs, if they're walk-up ATMs, are open 24 hours with that door that locks, right? So he's watching, days and days and days and days of footage. And that sounds pretty intense and boring, but he's determined to do it. The thing about the creamy cold man is he didn't come every day, and he always came at a different time. You could never predict when you'd hear that maddening Pop Goes the Weasel tune. Marty had no way of knowing when he might pass by in the background. He watched hour after hour of tape, amazed at how many people at the ATM made faces at the camera, figuring no one would actually watch it. He saw one mugging, which his father claimed he already knew about, but no ice cream truck. He was about to give up when a white blur zoomed past in the background. A white blur that was somehow different from all the other cars, trucks, and buses that zipped by. Marty hit the pause button so hard the remote flew out of his hand. He picked it up and played the last few seconds frame by frame. It was there in the 10th frame. It was blurry. It was faint, but it was there. A speeding white truck with the pictures of ice cream selections on the side. And there was a big sign over the service window that said, creamy cold. So now he's got visual evidence, right? He's got actual proof that what Tyler said isn't necessarily accurate. There is some substance, some actual living truck that's going around their neighborhood. Success. Proof positive. There actually was a creamy cold truck. Tyler had been wrong. It was real. Maybe he was right in saying that it never stopped, but that could just be because it was driven by a psychotic ice cream man. Sure, that was it. Some lunatic who got his kicks out of taunting people with the promise of ice cream never delivered, but this was no ghost truck. Then Marty let the video go one more frame. And what he saw in the next frame really got his attention. The truck had progressed farther into the image. Its front end was already out of the picture, but now the entire sign above the service window could be read. Creamy cold. Catch me if you dare. Marty smiled. This was a challenge if ever there was one. He would catch the creamy cold man, not just for himself, but for all the kids who had ever run out into the street only to be denied the ice cream they so rightfully deserved. The creamy cold man was going down. So for Marty, this is kind of a call to action because this dare, right? This dare is designed to, basically get someone to go after that truck. And where, logical people like you or I would look at that and be like, no thanks, I can get ice cream elsewhere. Marty doesn't see it that way. Marty sees it as, I'm finally going to win something. I'm finally going to be victorious. I'm finally going to do something that other kids cannot do. And so for him, This is a battle cry. He's ready for this, or at least he thinks he is. Our blue section marks off a new area, and so we have another illusion. Literature tells of a captain named Ahab. Ahab had an unhealthy obsession with a great white whale that led to the destruction of his ship and his own untimely end. He had a first mate named Starbuck. I know what you're thinking, that Starbuck had absolutely nothing to do with making coffee. If he had, perhaps Captain Ahab might have kicked the white whale habit, and pursued the white chocolate latte instead of the white whale. But unfortunately, as Ahab discovered, obsessions are rarely reasonable and quite often will lead to someone's personal doom, although few involve the death of a sea mammal. This illusion comes to us from the world of literature, and it's a real book. Any idea what it is? It's called Moby Dick. Moby Dick is the name of the whale. Ahab is the name of the captain who wants to kill the whale. And unfortunately, spoiler alert, doesn't succeed and ends up killing himself instead. So, it's an interesting reference to obsession. And I think this part is the part that, again, is foreboding. Because we talked about the fact that Marty is obsessed. And so obsession, according to this, is going to lead to his personal doom. So we'll see how that doom plays out. Marty's great white whale had 4 wheels and played a painfully annoying tune. He had no Starbuck to help him since his first mate, Tyler, was off at the tribal casino and, thanks to the luck of the Irish, was raking in the big bucks. Therefore, in this obsession, Marty was alone. Catching the ice cream truck on film was different than catching it in person. It required a plan. He drew a map of the neighborhood marking the entry and exit points. He labeled the sight lines from various key vantage spots. Then Marty took stock of the tools at his disposal. There were lots of them because Mr. Zybeck often brought home things from the office that wouldn't be missed. Things like paper clips or police tape, which was good for wrapping presents if you ran out of ribbon. Mr. Zybeck brought home a few body bags once. Mrs. Zybeck found them wonderful for storing linens until they gave Grandma quite a scare. The various items Mr. Zybeck made off with from the police station were stockpiled in the garage. Marty systematically went through them, searching for things he could use. There was a stun gun, but it was missing its charger. There was an entire case of pepper spray. There were batons and police lights, but none of them could be retooled for Marty's big scheme until he saw the spike strip rolled up in the corner. Marty had seen spike strips before. In a police pursuit, they were rolled out in front of a speeding car to pop the tires and bring the chase to an end. Mom and Dad had used the strip once to stop Marty's older sister from sneaking out at night, but it was only effective the first time. This is exactly what he needed. Maybe he couldn't stop the ice cream man, but 4 flat tires would slow him down to a crawl. With surprising stealth and cunning, Marty set his trap and waited until he could spring it. So what's Marty's plan? He's going to use these spike strips. Ooh, sorry about that. He's going to use the spike strip, and it tells us that it had stopped Marty's sister from sneaking out. He's hoping that it's going to flatten the tires of the ice cream truck and slow it down to a crawl. And so he basically believes that this is the key to capturing the creamy cold man. So we have a blue section. Let's find out. Fables tell of a tortoise who manages to beat a hare in a race. So the tortoise and the hare is also the same as the turtle and the rabbit. In a race, usually a rabbit would be faster, but there is a fable that talks about the tortoise and the hare. The hare started out in the lead, but he was so sure of his victory that he took a nap as he neared the finish line and slept while the tortoise slowly but surely took the gold. Of course, in reality, the hare was probably eaten by a pack of wolves, and that's why the tortoise won the race. Because after all, nature is cruel, but it doesn't lessen the moral of the story. Slow and steady, and a really hard fang-proof shell wins the race. So in this illusion, we get the idea that Mr. Slow, Marty Zybeck, is going to win what he wants to win by being slow and steady. Let's hope we're right. This was a lesson Marty always took to heart. He was always last. He was always behind. But in the end, Marty always reached his goal. That's interesting. So it shows us that Marty's got a growth mindset. He doesn't care how long something takes. He's going to succeed. And he had a tough enough shell to ignore the bites and pecks of others who would much rather see him fail. So this is interesting. When Marty sets his mind to something, he is successful. He just goes about it in a way that's slow. So I think that's an interesting thing to point out and think about. Marty waited with uncommon patience until July 4th, when at 8:40 in the evening he heard a familiar tune piercing the twilight. He wasted no time. He started his stopwatch and ran into the street. The streets were deserted, as everyone had gone down to the lake to watch the fireworks that would be starting at any moment. It would be perfect. There was no one to get in Marty's way. Instead of following the music as he usually did, he ran across the street, through 2 backyards, until he came out onto another street. His neighborhood was like a maze. Streets that wound back and forth. It was easy to get lost if you didn't know where you were going. There were only 2 entrances into Marty's subdivision. A vehicle moving at breakneck speed of 60 miles per hour could wind through the streets from one entrance to another in exactly 1 minute and 45 seconds. So it told us that Marty had drawn this map, right? And if he's got a map of the neighborhood, and the neighborhood only has 2 entrance points, and all the streets wind in between it, that means that the ice cream truck has to try and get out in one of 2 places, here or here. So Marty's trap, those spike strips, have to be placed somewhere near those entrance and exit points. So let's see what happens. By cutting through backyards, he got to the first entrance in 50 seconds. Sitting there on the sloped street was his sister's car. His sister had recently gotten her license and was forced, in spite of the utter embarrassment of it, to drive their mother's old Buick station wagon. Marty had promised her his dessert for 3 weeks if she would just park her car in this exact spot. Interesting. So, here we go again. Sorry about that. Interesting that his sister's car is now going to block one of those entrances. So the car is going to make sure that the ice cream truck can't get out that way. Now he pulled open the door, put the car in neutral, and moved away from it. It began to roll backward, where it hit a plastic trash bin resting in the gutter across the street. Marty had positioned the trash bin there and filled it with bricks so it would stop the car from rolling. It did the job. It did the job. Now the station wagon was blocking off all traffic in and out of the neighborhood. So this is actually pretty smart. He figured out that if he only has to worry about one entry point, then the ice cream truck has to be in one location, and that's where he can put the spike strips. And let's realize that if the truck was indeed moving in this direction and it notices, oh, I can't get out, it now has to turn around and go back in the opposite direction in order to get out of the neighborhood. And that buys Marty a little time to make sure that he can get to the other entrance and put those spike strips down. As for the creamy cold truck, it had come in from the other entrance. It would try to get out this way in exactly 25 seconds, and when it couldn't, it would have to turn around to go out the other way it came. Even as he ran from the station wagon, he could hear the truck drawing nearer, but he didn't wait for it. Not here. He took off again, stumbled over a picket fence, then crossed through more backyards until he emerged on the other end of the subdivision. By now, the ice cream truck had tried to escape, but the station wagon would have blocked its path. It would be heading this way now. In fact, he could hear the music growing louder. So that music is definitely helpful in helping Marty track where the ice cream man is. He pulled out the spike strip that he had hidden under a hedge and rolled it out so that it spans the entire width of the street. So there's no way that the ice cream truck can avoid this. His timing was perfect because 10 seconds later he saw with his own eyes for the first time in his life the creamy cold truck. It had screeched around the corner and was heading straight for him. "Catch me if you dare," the sign said. Now the truck would be at his mercy. Marty stepped out of the way as it came crashing past, bringing the icy wind in its wake. And then it hit the spike strip. Boom! Boom! All 4 tires blew. The spike strip flew from the street, snagging in a hedge, and the truck lost control. It spun a full 360 before hitting a street lamp so hard it blew out its light. So what Marty basically did here is technically illegal, just so you know. He basically destroyed the tires on this truck and made it so that the truck can't move, okay? And there it sat with 4 flat tires. It was pure white with a shiny silver grille. Its front windows were dark, so he couldn't see in. The music it always played had fallen silent, and all Marty could hear was the engine in a menacing idle. Menacing means that it's sinister, it's evil. So this doesn't sound like a good truck for Marty to be messing with. Marty slowly approached it, ready to relish his victory. The solid steel gate of the service window was down, but as he drew near, it slowly began to rise, and fog spilled out, the icy breath of the mechanical beast. Then, inside, someone began to sing in a deep, gravelly tone. All around the mulberry bush, the monkey chased the weasel. The monkey thought 'twas all in fun. Pop goes the weasel. In the darkness of the truck, a figure came forward to the service window, a man. He was entirely bald, but had a bushy brown beard covered in frost. He wore a white and pink polka dot uniform, the official uniform of the Creamy Cold Man. "Well, well, well," he said. "A customer. I caught you fair and square. I want my ice cream." The man leaned on the window's little silver ledge. "It'll cost you," he said. Marty pulled out $1 from his pocket and looked at the picture of the ice cream choices. "I want a cosmic raspberry swirl bar, now." The man reached his hand toward the $1, but he didn't take it just yet. He hesitated and then said, "Are you offering me this money in exchange for my ice cream?" "Of course I am." The man smiled, his lips stretching so thin they disappeared between the hair of his mustache and his beard. "Well then, the bargain is made." He took the $1, then turned around, reached into his freezer, and produced an ice cream bar. He held it out to Marty. "One cosmic raspberry swirl bar." Now this is interesting because usually when you buy ice cream, they don't say, "Are you offering me this money in exchange for my ice cream?" and the bargain is made. So again, negative signs that Marty's in for some trouble. Marty grabbed the bar, ripped off the paper, and took a bite. It was, just as he suspected, the most marvelous, the most creamy, the most flavorful ice cream he had ever tasted. The sensation was so overwhelming, it took over all of his senses. Bit by bite, he devoured the bar, and when it was done, he licked the stick clean. Only after the last bit of ice cream had dissolved on his tongue did he notice he wasn't standing where he had been standing before. He was still looking at the ice cream man, but now Marty was standing inside the truck. And the ice cream man was standing in the street. The man was smiling even wider than before. "Wait a second," said Marty. How'd I get in here? The bargain has been made. Enjoy your ice cream. He bowed deeply to Marty, but it was more a mocking gesture than a respectful one. And when he rose from his bow, Marty realized that man wasn't wearing the uniform anymore. He was wearing clothes that were so small on him, they were popping at the seams. A red shirt, white pants, and a red baseball cap covering his bald head. It looked like a Little League uniform. Who is this, guys? Somebody we remember from an illusion. This is Jim Jim. So now we know what happened to Jim Jim Jeffries. He did disappear because he got basically sucked into the ice cream truck. It took 39 years for someone to catch me, and now I'm finally free. Then he began to back away. Hey, ice cream man, wait. You get back here. I demand to know what's going on. Oh, I'm not the ice cream man, he said, and pointed a long-nailed finger at Marty. You are. And sure enough, when Marty looked down, he saw that he was wearing a white uniform with pink polka dots. As for me, my name is James, said the man in the Little League outfit. But my friends call me... Oops, sorry about that. But my friends call me Jim Jim. Then he turned and ran away. Marty's whole body suddenly felt as cold as the ice cream he had just devoured. He tried to climb out of the service window, but the steel gate came crashing down and sealed the window shut. He went to the driver's door, but there was no handle to open it. He felt a strange rising sensation. It's the wheels, Marty thought. The wheels are healing themselves and filling with air. So we're getting the idea this is not like any traditional ice cream truck. This is some kind of strange, mythical, supernatural ice cream truck. In his fear, Marty found himself hyperventilating and getting dizzy. Hyperventilating is when you get very short of breath because you're panicking. So he slowed his breathing down, closed his eyes, and tried to face the reality of the situation. Fact. He had made a bargain with Jim Jim Jeffries for the ice cream in the truck. Fact. Jim Jim had been trapped in this freezing place for 39 years. Fact. Marty wasn't going anywhere. This is a sad conclusion, right? Because basically it means that Marty's life as he knew it is over. And now he's stuck in this truck. But that wasn't exactly true, was it? Yes, he was trapped in a cursed truck, but that didn't mean he couldn't go anywhere. The truth is, he could go everywhere, because even a cursed truck needs a driver. When Marty opened his eyes again, he felt much calmer. Calm enough to reach into the freezer and pull out another ice cream bar. That freezer was full of them. In fact, it seemed bottomless. Then he sat in the driver's seat, put his hands on the steering wheel, and stepped on the accelerator, feeling the engine rev. He didn't know how to drive, but that hadn't stopped Jim Jim, had it? With frost forming in his hair, he grabbed the stick shift, threw the truck into gear, and peeled out. As he did, he heard the music begin to play, blasting out of the speaker on his roof. All around the mulberry bush, the monkey chased the weasel. There were neighborhoods to visit, hundreds of them. And there were thousands of kids to roust out of the warmth of their homes, all clutching dollar bills and spare change, running through the streets in search of an ice cream man that they'd never catch. Just the thought of it made Marty floor the accelerator, and he let loose a wild, cackling laugh. Because for the first time in his life, Marty Zybeck was fast. Okay, folks, so that is the end of this story. And as you notice, I mean, we took notes along the way, and those notes are definitely going to, help us looking back as we answer questions. So definitely make sure that you've taken these notes in your copy of the packet. And keep in mind that annotating is something that helps us, especially as you move into high school, because you will read a lot of stories in high school. And before a major exam or a final exam, It's going to be very difficult to remember all those stories. Annotating the notes that you take is really designed to help you look back at those stories and very quickly at a glimpse get an idea of what those stories were about. Okay? Have a great day, guys. I hope you liked this story. It's certainly one of my favorites. And we'll talk about it as we do questions.